Okay, Sean, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon and welcome to Stock Talk. My name is Sean Kabak of Manitoba Agriculture and Portage, and I will be your host. Manitoba Ag is offering a series of livestock and forage webinars to help Manitoba producers. These webinars are running monthly until April. We're glad you can join us for today's presentations, which will be recorded so you can view them at a future date. If you have any questions during the talk, please type them into the chat. In last month's Stock Talk, Dr. Campbell of the Western College of Veterinary Medicine talked about trace mineral survey conducted across Western Canada, including Manitoba. The survey found cows were deficient for copper 24 to 43% of the time, and copper deficiency affects livestock performance, immunity, animal health, and reproduction and breeding. So to help alleviate the copper shortages, ensure adequate mineral is being supplemented in the cattle rations. Force feeding mineral for 3 months before calving resulted in 6 times more cows likely to have adequate copper compared to free choice. And cows force-fed the mineral cycled 2 times faster and became pregnant 5 days earlier. As well, we have to ensure the protein, energy, and vitamins are properly balanced in the cattle ration. So when you look at how long our winter feeding period is, we're still about halfway through. So there's still time, if you haven't done any feed testing or ration balancing, to look at that. With dry conditions and a lack of snow so far this winter, most of southern Manitoba is less than 50% normal moisture since November 1st, and some areas are as low as 20% in southern Manitoba. That makes our first presentation especially important. So to start off today's Stock Talk with an MASC Forage and Livestock Insurance update, we have Jeff Leegarden of MASC. I'd like to welcome Jeff.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to start sharing my screen. Let me know when it's up there, Sean, please.
Yeah, we can see it if you go into presentation mode.
We're good now.
It's taking a second to come up.
Just click resume slideshow right underneath where it says slideshow right there. Good job. Yeah.
Oh.
There we go.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, everyone. Once again, thanks everyone for being part of this. Jeff Leegarden is my name. I'm the business development specialist with MASC, helping out with all aspects to what could be part of the producers' questions and answers through the whole program. So what we want to start talking about today is the forage insurance we offer and the flexibility and affordability about it. But instead of going through all the details, I wanted to actually bring up what it really means in certain areas and what you can expect to see for values if you're a new producer coming into MASC and wanting to be a forage producer and see what values you could get. So the biggest thing I wanted to show you is the numbers, and if you can see it or you want to be able to see it, these are what we're looking at here. The Select Hay program, which is a part of taking the forages and splitting them up into individual crops, meaning alfalfa would be separate from alfalfa grass. Grasses are separate. Sweet clover and coarse hay are the different types that you can have. And within that, you can select one or all of them to be insured, but you actually could see what your numbers would be. And we do have different forage regions. On our website, the masc.mb.ca, you can go to the Tools tab and go to calculators, and there's a forage calculator. So I've used region 2, which is in the Grandview area, but you can actually go to the map, click on the region, and then go through this and calculate what your numbers could be for your regions. So as you're looking at this, may not make a lot of sense to you right off the bat, but we've split each one of them into 4 years and younger and 4 years and older, meaning that we understand that some of these forages in the early years produce more than they do later. And then we combine it into a individual crop coverage for alfalfa grass, and etc. But if you were a new producer coming into the program and you were in region 2, you would be looking at $1 coverage for an alfalfa stand field of $362.02 to $261 based on the when it was established, and then for a premium of $21.69. And if you go through it, you can see all of them. And it's real simple, but those are the real numbers we're looking at when you want to get into the forage insurance program. You can talk to your local MASC insurance specialist, but it does have those calculators on and tools on the website. So just to look at those numbers, like I said, you're up to 362 at the top end, and your Corsair is everything outside of cattails and willows at just shy of $100 an acre. I'll show you now the basic K coverage. So basic K coverage is we take all the different types, you give us our acres, and you blend them into one total coverage where you don't have to worry about keeping each field separate. You don't have to have a relative feed value or any of those things. But you can see the 7 different types. We do 10 acres. It actually is going to work out to 82 metric ton is your coverage. 97,000 or $9,700 in total dollars, or 138.94 per acre, and your premium is $557. So that's the big thing with our forage insurance. I wanted to look at some real numbers. Obviously, March 31st is the deadline to be part of it, so you need to contact your insurance agency or service center that's closest to you, set up an appointment to be registered into the program before March 31st and sign an insurance contract. Is there any questions on the forage insurance or wanting to look at some of these numbers more specific before I move on?
Not yet. There's nothing there yet. So go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. So I really wanted to touch base on a major, obviously the timing is right now with the livestock price insurance. If you didn't know, we are now live with calf insurance policy are being updated and sent out every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I don't know if you have any knowledge of the livestock price insurance program, but I really wanted to look at what's happening. And we're at record-setting numbers right now of what you can look at for a insured index and what you can look at for the opportunity is within the program. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend that you go to our the livestock price insurance website and sign up for the daily email premiums and settlement tables, because then you'll have what I'm showing you right now sent to you every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So because we're getting this every day, I was able to put this premium table into my presentation, which is yesterday, Valentine's Day, if you missed it. And this is the calf table for Saskman. And we're looking at a value of 390 for an insured index on a 600 weight animal. And that premium goes out to be 1262 per 100. So it's a high premium, but that's the highest level we've ever seen an insured index for a calf in the whole 10 years of the program. So if you want to know real numbers, the reason why I circled several of these ones along the way is at that 390, if you did 6 weight animals at the 100 weights, that's a 75, 72 premium per animal to guarantee that 390, that the futures are going to be 390 in the fall. It's a huge dollar. It may be the highest dollar value in a premium that we've seen, but we've never seen that 390 before. And the other part of it is some people just get caught looking at the top of the table. And I wanted to just look at some of the other numbers throughout the table and give you some perspective. Last year, 380, when I looked at my own livestock management and what I sold my calves through at early October, I was just over that 380 average through the ring, and nowhere near that could I get a policy for that. So it was a good year because I didn't trigger a policy, but in retrospect, it was one of the best years I've ever had selling cattle. And now I can get a policy to represent what I did last year. And that premium at $720 per 100 is only $43 per head. And I think when I talk to a lot of people about livestock price insurance, some say that's a lot of money. And I said, if we're over 380 on 6 weight calves, I can afford $43 per head. But if that's a problem, 370 is still more than we've ever seen, or what most people have ever seen in the program. So if you look at the 370, we're down to $22 per head. Is that what we want? Probably not. But at the end of the day, if I told anybody last year or the year before, I could guarantee you that the cattle futures are going to average 370 in the fall, everybody would have signed up for $22 a head. So the volatility in the market, everything that's happening right now, I just want everyone to be aware of what's out there. I want them to be able to get the emails. I'm happy to say that hopefully next week on our MASC YouTube channel, we'll have a YouTube video that'll walk you through how to find the tables on the LPI website and how to sign up for these emails. So they're coming to you daily. You don't have to log on and see what it's at. You can actually just open your email and see these emails after 3 every day. So that's what I had for you today. I didn't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to be aware of the 2 programs that are really important to us right now. Sean, if there's any questions, let me know.
Yeah, so thanks, Jeff. Some really good coverages on the Forage insurance program as well as the livestock insurance program. Just for clarification, so if a producer, for example, takes out a policy at 370, is it using a 650 weight or a 600 weight?
The calf policy is based on 6 weights, which is a 6 weight average. So it takes 550 to 650. 549 is not included in the program. 651 is not included in the program. The weights that we use are all the livestock auctions basically in Saskatchewan and Manitoba for the Saskman and the direct sales. And they are calculated out and printed a settlement on the Monday. With, I believe it's 12%, the mean average, the top percent and the bottoms and 1s and 2s are taken out of that average. So
okay, so
it's a real average when it comes to the settlements, but yes, it's based on a 6 weight.
A 6 weight. So then if a producer decided to take a policy at 370, you would have coverage for $22.20 per head and cost of I think it's $22 per calf. So
Yeah.
You don't have to insure at the very top end.
No, that's why the table has those options. We want to give the producer the best opportunity to find a spot within the table that fits their management and where they want to spend money and what they want coverage for.
And producers can take up policy on the calf program until, is it May?
It's going to be the end of May and into June, I believe. I didn't look, but yes, you've got till there is a deadline. And then the calendar of insurance is on the LPI website as well. But I believe we sneak into June. Absolutely.
Okay, so a bit of time for producers to keep an eye on the premiums and on the coverages, and definitely consider that as well as the forage insurance.
Absolutely, yeah. The deadline isn't right away, but the forage insurances, don't forget, you have to be signed up by March 31st.
Can producers sign up for the forage insurance online, or do they have to go into their local MASC office?
They do have to they have to initiate a call. A lot of it can be done through emails, but they have to initiate the call through a service center.
Okay. Lori, I'm not sure if you had any other questions.
Nope, no other questions popped up. So I think we're good to move forward.
Not, thank you, Jeff.
Yep. Thanks everyone for coming on.
And next, talking about livestock predation and prevention, we have Ray Bittner, who is the project lead for the livestock predation and prevention project with the Manitoba beef producers, and he also farms in the Moose Horn area. So I'd like to welcome Ray.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sean, for introducing me. I'm just going to get my my screen here working the way I want it.
Always takes a little patience sometimes. It's coming. Oh, looks good. Looks good, Ray. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I just thanks for giving me some time to talk to producers about the livestock predation project. It's a project that I started with Manitoba beef producers in 2020. It was a 3-year project. It's funded by the province of Manitoba, Manitoba beef producers, and Manitoba Sheep Association. It was all set up from a group of representatives from Manitoba Beef, Manitoba Sheep, Manitoba Agriculture, Manitoba Conservation, Manitoba Trappers Association, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and Manitoba Agriculture Services Corporation. Those groups had a plan that, we have to have something to try and protect producers from predation. And this is the pilot project that came of it. When you look at the numbers of how wildlife damage has gone over the years, it keeps on getting more. And this is a table out of the MASC yearly report. And from it, we see that the most recent year of complete year claims were up 34% on predation. Compensation was up 52%. So that's obviously a combination of both higher cattle prices and greater numbers of cattle and sheep and all of the compensatable species being lost. So overall, the numbers have gone up quite a bit. We're just about at $3 million of compensation per year. So Manitoba government is taking this file very seriously, as producers should too. The livestock predation pilot project, we tried to spread it out all over the province to try and make sure that the things that we were protecting against, we've seen all areas of the province. So we had 114 projects, over 48 producers across the map, as you can see here. And I'm just going to get started right away. One of the things that we tried was veterinary assessment for predators. So basically, call out a veterinarian, get him to talk to you about any of the issues that may be hitting your herd, anything that can be fixed. Mineral supplementation, vaccinations, treatments, and is it warranted to leave some of your animals in safe pens at home rather than sending them out to distant pastures? Once this was all put together, we sent out surveys to say, how did this work for you? And of the producers who uptook it, 92% agreed that the extra eyes on your herd or your flock is a good idea. 50% of the producers who did it will do it again at their own cost. And the great thing is it could be part of your VCPR agreement. In other words, when you have to have a vet come out anyways to your farm, this could be the visit that they do it on. So next one, game cameras. Lots of people are familiar with it for whitetail hunting and so forth. In our case, we were using it for watching for what type of predators we had out there. We tried to get the best cameras out there we could. We had LTE cameras and memory card cameras. And to clarify, an LTE camera is a camera that takes the picture of the wildlife or whatever walks in front of the camera, sends the image to the internet, sends it to your smartphone or your tablet or whatever the case may be, and you can see what's going on. If you want, you can even have alerts so that if a wolf stands in front of the camera, it takes a picture and sends it directly to you, and your phone goes bing, and you can take a look at it. So 58% of producers believe the LTE camera was worth it. And these are about $1,000 cameras. So that's a pretty serious amount of money. And 58% believed it was worth it. 42% felt the cameras helped with removal of predators. 26% of producers had some technical difficulties, but 83% would recommend to others. And my personal view of what I've seen when producers were sending their surveys back was, if you're a hunter-trapper type of a person or had any interest in doing that, the cameras were very helpful. If you knew that you were not going to be hunting or trapping your predators, they probably didn't do you a lot of good. So next, GPS trackers for livestock. So basically, a tracker that we can attach to the livestock. In the pictures here, the top one has a white ear tag hanging out of his ear, and the other one, the black cow, has a tag attached to a collar on the neck. So basically, from your smartphone or tablet, you could find out where your animals are and what they're doing. In some cases, even if they're moving more quickly than normal, you could get an alert sent to your phone. It's quite interesting technology. We tried several different makers: Digit Animal from Spain, Sares from Australia, Tractive from Sweden, I think, and Lone Star from Texas. 100% of producers were able to log on and track their cattle, sheep, or dogs or donkeys from the start of the program. 83% of producers generally check their GPS location before going out to pasture check. And this is the important part. If you have a large, extensive pasture, which is quite often predator pasture, sometimes it takes a while to find the cattle or the sheep or whatever the case may be. With these GPS locators, you could just basically drive, head out to the pasture, drive straight to the pasture group, and not waste your time looking around. So people found that when they could do pasture checks quicker, they did pasture checks more often. 78% of producers would repurchase equipment if lost, and that is about $400 per head. And generally, we installed it on about 5% of the herd. When you're spending $400 a head, you don't put them on every cow, every cow. Issues we had was cracked plastic cases. Solar panel charging was deficient at times, especially fall and winter. Battery life was short in cases, but the opportunities to be able to use it on dogs, donkeys, and then also figure out pasture management. Where do your cattle spend time and where won't they? This is a video that I took of the tracking of a group of animals a few years ago. And you can see on the screen the little gray dots ripping around these 2 quarters of land. 2 of those dots are cows and 1 dot is a donkey. So the owner of this group was able to tell where they were all week or exactly when she wanted to. So it's amazing what the technology has come to do. And that was just a 20 gram tag hanging from the ear of a cow that did all that tracking on each one of those 3 animals. So it is quite a technology. I see this in people's futures. At this time, the technology probably needs some work, for a reliability standpoint, but I do see it in people's futures. Next one. Turbo-fladry fence. Fladry is a temporary polysteel wire with flags sewn on, hanging down. And you can see it in the picture there. There's a barbed wire fence. And then there's this little light fence with these flags hanging down. It certainly isn't very scary to humans, but to wolf and coyote, they are actually scary. They somehow don't like the flapping flags. They're not familiar with it. And 60% of the producers who tried it had predators stay out for the period of use. 50% of the producers who used it believed that the fladry saved livestock, and 80% would purchase again. It's not you don't have very much there, but it costs about $1 a foot to install. So you have to be fairly serious about it. The other thing about it is you probably should only use it for 30, 45, maybe 60 days max. If you use it longer, the wolves, coyotes will become acclimatized to it and just walk right through it, which isn't helpful. We found it has to be on the outside of the fence because the sheep might eat the streamers, and for cattle, it's not tall enough and the cattle can easily reach over or jump over or do whatever they want. So short term, it did work. I think it's something the jury is out whether Manitoba producers like it. We have found many instances where Rocky Mountain producers who are dealing with a lot of wolves have been liking it and have been using it. So interesting stuff. Cowbells. I got a cowbell with me today. Hope that's not too loud for you guys. We tried cowbells. It's the oldest technology on earth, just about. We use steel bells with neck straps that were nylon or leather. 67% of producers who used them agreed that they helped find the cows. 60% put the bells on the slow cows. 17% believed that the bells attracted predators. And actually, there is some scientific studies that say, if you know where the cattle are, so do the predators. But whether it was a big success or failure or not, it's hard to say. A lot of producers liked them and would use them again. They were about $30 to $40, depending on where you get them. and we put them on at about a 5% application rate. Dead stop composting pens. I think this was one of our most important RMPs. Basically, what we did is we built a 60 by 60 chain link fence buried into the ground 6 inches. We put rectangular gates on with small gaps and a solid threshold, so coyotes and wolves wouldn't dig underneath, and they wouldn't dig underneath the gate. To compost, you could use straw, bulrush, sawdust, or any carbon source to cover. 70% of the producers we worked with had no invasion rate. 50% of the producers felt there was less predation because of the pens. 50% believed it helped save livestock. 78 found that there was no smell or minimal smell. 56% had no bird picking, and 80% would rebuild. The challenge we found is that in cases where you have it close to a bush and you have a lot of bears around, the bears are tough on chain link. What we do recommend is putting a insulated high tensile wire around the top and an electric fencer to it. So when the bear's got his claws in the chain link and they touch their nose to the top, they're going to get a good zap and then decide that there's better places to eat. We really like this from every standpoint, really. There's less food in the food chain to attract predators to your farm. There's also less transfer of pathogens. You know, if you have something bad in your herd, you get it out of your herd, you put it in the composting pen, cover it up with straw, and just let it compost. Leave it there for a long time. Don't be in a hurry to go and spread the compost on the field. Use your warm compost to start composting the next mortality that comes along. There are really no downsides other than a little bit of extra work. Okay, next. Solar fox lights. These solar fox lights are about the size of a hockey puck, not very big. They're powered by a solar panel that's integrated into the machine. It's intended to scare fox, coyote, wolf. It's intended for short-term use during rest seasons, such as calving or lambing. We had 45% cattle producers and 55% sheep producers use it. And in all honesty, most of the sheep producers had already been using them from time to time. Generally, we had 4 lights per paddock. 83% believed it reduced predation. 85% would replace if lost. And 1 per half acre is recommended. The one thing to note is it only works in dark nights. And in May and June, dark nights are very short. So if your calving or lambing season is in May, June, you're not going to get so many hours of use out of these things. If you're calving in January, February, or weaning in October, November, December, they actually work quite well. We do recommend you don't try and use them all year round. Use them for a month or 2 during risk seasons, and then put them away. Don't get the predators acclimatized to them or accustomed to them. Electronet fencing. Some people call it polynet or electronet, whatever you want to call it. It's basically just a poly net that has aluminum or stainless steel leads in it, and it's able to be portable. You know, you can build a 1 acre paddock here, move your sheep over, 1 acre paddock there. It accomplishes rotational grazing. It also accomplishes keeping your livestock guardian dog in the fence. And once you put together a system of a good electronet fencing, livestock guardian dog, it's an excellent way of keeping the predators out. Predators just don't want to mess with that when there's a dog on the other side of the fence and you got this electric wall in between. 100% agreed it reduces predation. 89% had the fence stay upright no matter how good, well or not well they built them. 100% agree it saves livestock, and we really feel the guardian dogs are the clincher. If you put a guardian dog and electronet together, it's a very strong system. It's not good for cattle. Cattle are too tall. They reach over and pull them down, and horned sheep can get caught. So it doesn't do everything for everybody, but people who can use it really like it. Predator-resistant livestock pens. We built 10 of these. Most of them we built with 7-wire high tensile electric fence. We put the wires close to the ground. We built gates with square frames and solid thresholds. we had 80% of all producers excluded from, or predators excluded from the pen. 50% of the producers had to disconnect the bottom wire at some point throughout the year due to deep snow, ice, flooding, mud, certain things. We had half-half between sheep and cattle producers. 90% believed it saved livestock, and 90% would rebuild, and 90% would recommend to others. It really was a success. The big caution I'll put on pens like this, if you're going to have a hot wire close to the ground, you're going to need a very strong fencer. And you should start by making sure your ground is as level as possible, even if you have to build a little bit of dam and diking to cross your fence over. The other thing is make sure that you get all the sticks and stones and stuff so that you can mow on either side and keep both sides free and clear of debris. If you let cattle roll bales into these fences and let the manure build up, they certainly won't be working for you when you need them. So here's a couple pictures, and the one picture here shows our 7 wires, and unfortunately we have a whole bunch of sticks and stuff on the ground, which is not recommended. But the producer who had this fence up was having a horrific wolf problem with his fall calving, and basically we put up the fence, he put his cattle in there, and he was able to stop night predation on those cattle just lickety split. He was super happy, and it was a grand success. The other picture here is apron wire. Most people in Manitoba haven't seen it. It's not technically available in Manitoba yet. We had to import it from the States. We picked it up in Minot. It was made in Texas, I believe. It's 16 high tensile wires, and it gets very close together in the bottom to keep wolves and coyotes from climbing through. And because it's called apron wire, it also has an apron at the bottom that sticks out 22 inches. So if you look at the bottom, you see that crossing the ground. That's intended to keep them from, the predators from digging underneath. So this stuff is really good success. And I think for dead stock pens and livestock predator resistant pens, this is probably the way we should go. It's not cheap. It's about $4 a foot for the wire alone, but it's not that hard to install, and it doesn't ground out when you have things happen like water, ice, snow, and manure. In order to build gates for either these dead stock pens or livestock pens, in some cases we built some drill stem thresholds. So basically we've got drill stem underneath, and underneath that we have some hog panels so that if coyotes or wolves start digging, they're going to dig into some steel. This worked quite well. The other option we went with was concrete thresholds, and we had good luck with that. The only thing is, I would say, is in both of these cases, if you're hauling out tons and tons of manure in summertime on soft ground, you'll probably want to take the fence down and drive over a fence wire rather than drive over the concrete. You just don't want to damage the concrete with super heavy duty equipment. Livestock guardian dogs and donkeys. We didn't specifically test them, but when you're working with producers who have predator problems, we certainly heard a lot about donkeys and dogs. Sheep and dogs get along very well. Generally, the dogs, if trained properly, live with the sheep, act like a sheep, protect their flock. Guardian dogs don't work nearly as well for cattle herds. Most of our cattle herd problems are in midsummer with wolves, where the wolf is far from the person's house. You have to feed the dog daily. It doesn't work ideal. If you want to make it work, you can, but it just doesn't click quite as nicely as sheep. Donkeys are generally better for cattle. Donkeys can be absolutely fierce against coyotes and wolves. Sometimes donkeys lose to wolves. But one thing we have to say is there's no 100% success here. There'll always be slips, things can happen, and you can lose your guardian animals. We found that the GPS collars can help. You can know if your dog is escaping out to get female companionship, or running down the road chasing cars, or visiting the neighbor and about to get shot. Sometimes the GPS collars can help you avert those issues. And the last thing is some donkeys and dogs are useless. You can try your hardest, try and train them. it doesn't always work. So sadly, you may spend money on a donkey and find no use and be hoof trimming all the time and then still have problems. So there's no 100% here, but we definitely had a lot of good comments and something you should consider if you're having a lot of predation problems. The second last slide of my presentation here is I talked really fast. I talked about a lot of things here. If you want to get the lowdown on what really happened, we built a whole bunch of fact sheets for you. You can go to Manitoba Beef Producers website, click on producers and look for the livestock predation link. And you'll find fact sheets that you can quickly download on PDF. You can print them out for your own use. The other thing that we did is we took some YouTube videos of what we actually seen. The one in the picture here is Ray Whitmore introducing a producer who had a dead stock pen, who was very happy with the dead stock pen. He explained how it all worked and why he likes it. And we asked very simple, short questions. Our producers we interviewed gave us very long, in-depth answers that will lead you down the right path. So please check out our website. We tried to produce enough products or enough literature and stuff that you can get the gist of the program without having to talk to me. But I do welcome producers to give me a call. We'll see if we can help you with some of your mitigation plans. So with that, I do open it up for questions, and I hope 2024 can be a less predation year. So thank you, Sean. Is there any questions?
Thanks, Ray. So with the GPS collars or the GPS tags, it could be a strategy for producers, even if they don't have necessarily predator problems, but with the high cost of bulls now, that they tag their bulls and then they can still monitor where their herd is and how their bulls are doing and maybe get on top of a bull issue before it becomes really problematic. And the costs, I imagine, will start to come down. But is there a subscription cost to monitor the tags as well?
Yeah, good question and good points. First, I want to back up your point that, if you put a tag in each of the bulls and you can watch these bulls traveling around the pasture nice and evenly, competitively, it's great. If you see one bull standing in the corner or standing in the dugout or laying there dead, you can have a lot quicker response to these problems. So absolutely. Yes, unfortunately, almost all of them have some level of subscription. These companies love getting their money off the top, but they love getting a monthly bill too. We found one Lone Star tags from Texas. They came with as a 3-year package. The tag for sure is going to die in 3 years, but all of your subscription is paid up front. And that was about $400. It's probably the one I'm most happy with right now from a simplicity and reliability standpoint. But before you spend thousands and thousands of dollars, try a couple and see how they work. But they are cool. It's a good direction.
Yeah, I could see that technology becoming adopted by producers more and more down the road. And will more of that information be in the fact sheets that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've really tried hard to make the fact sheets very complete. The GPS one is the longest one we actually wrote. It's probably like 12 pages. And there's the short summary. So if you just want to read a little bit, you can shoot through there and then say goodbye. But if you really want to know about how each of the ones work, be it Lone Star, Sayers, or Digit Animal, we have like 2.5 pages description of pros and cons and testimonials. It's a really complete thing. We wanted to leave no stone unturned, so producers have a good resource to look for.
Okay, I don't think there's any other questions, Lori.
Nope, I don't see any.
So thanks again, Ray, for that interesting presentation. And next up, I just wanted to mention MASC does have a wildlife damage compensation program for both livestock and crop and feed losses. So contact your nearest MASC office if you do have any losses, and you don't have to be a forage or crop insurance contract holder to be eligible for that program. So if you have any predation losses throughout the year, or if you have feed losses from wildlife, contact MASC. Next, we will have a presentation on a cattle market update and outlook. We've seen strong feeder prices so far in 2024. So to tell us if this will continue or where prices are headed, we have Brenna Grant with Canfax. So I'd like to welcome Brenna.
Thank you, Sean, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. And as Sean indicated, we actually saw cattle prices make new record highs last year, and it's been quite the run over the last 18 months. Calf prices peaked in September at just under $4 per pound, and yearling prices were over $3.20. So it's been tremendous. And even when you look at this in terms of deflated values, you can see that we are still at those 2015 levels once deflation is taken into account. But at record high prices, there's a lot of nerves in the marketplace, and feedlots really got whiplash last fall when the nearby cattle futures dropped over $20 per hundredweight in a 5-week period from late October to early December. And lower prices turned feedlot margins negative. We quickly saw carcass weights get record high in Western Canada. And further volatility is expected in the market as we go through 2024. And so the big point here is at record high prices, with volatility, risk management is really, really key. But we also need to remember what are the fundamentals that are supporting this market, because watching these markets can be anxiety inducing and really stressful. And so you're going to hear a lot of things in the news over the coming year, and lots of these things can just be tidbits that take one point and really distort things. And so I want to remind you about the fundamentals that we're facing and what's supporting this market. But first, what are some of the things that are contributing to this volatility? I mentioned last fall the big move in the futures. This was caused by reports of much larger than expected heifer placements in the U.S. into U.S. feedlots in September, followed by some concerning reports about demand erosion and the very start of demand erosion. And this just shows how sensitive the market can be. I also want to remind you that in January, we regained 2/3 of what the market lost over that period in the fourth quarter. And that's because these fundamentals were being remembered. But during that time when everyone was concerned, you were also hearing reports out of Australia that they'd gone back into drought in June. And so they were liquidating and they had larger marketings, larger production, which was pushing larger exports into a number of countries, not just Asia, but also the North American market. And we'd seen their prices swing dramatically as they went into that drought period, as well as really strong price adjustments happening in Brazil. And so when you get this combination of news that sounds really negative, it's really easy for the markets to overreact. But this really tells you the fundamental underlying support that we have in the North American market. And the reality is that in the last cattle cycle, back in 2013, the US drought broke and we saw really strong heifer retention happening, which resulted in larger production by the second half of 2015. In contrast, the fact that we've had drought in North America over the last 2 to 3 years means that the January 1st inventory number of this year was below the 2014 low. We don't have heifer retention happening. So we know that once heifer retention happens, we're still potentially going to get a lower number, which means we're 2 to 3 years out of significantly tighter supplies coming forward. And this is what we know is coming down the pipeline. That is that fundamental support. And when we look at that last cattle cycle from the 2015 low to the 22 high, the US added 4 billion pounds of beef to the supply chain. And as we are starting, and we need to remember this, we're just starting the drop in supplies, down almost 5% last year, looking at a smaller decline of about 3.5% this year. But knowing the numbers coming forward, we actually could revisit that 2015 low. And that means that the highest prices in this current cycle are yet in front of us. And one of the reasons why it's really hard to wrap our heads around this is monthly cattle on feed from the US. And you can see right here, we're sitting and we're kind of like, no one really knows what we're talking about with tight supplies, because we still have large cattle on feed numbers right here, sort of similar to what you see back here in 2012. But what we need to remember is that in 2012, you saw over a 24-month period, these inventories drop really sharply down to this 2015 low. And so that's what everyone is gearing up for over the next 2 years, is this sharp drop of going back to where we saw these tight number of head. This means that there are going to be fewer cattle to fill feedlot pens. There are also going to be fewer cattle to fill hook spaces in packing plants. But one of the things you'll notice here is we had started that decline in 2023, and then we popped back up here in 24. And the big part of that story is what shook the markets last fall, and that's these large number of heifers being placed on feed. And so the US is above their long-term average for heifers going on to feed into finishing lots. And that's really supporting, supplies in the short term, which means that production decline this year is less than what was originally projected. The other thing I've been asked about as we think about this current cattle cycle is, carcass weights have really resulted in this long-term consolidation of, we just need fewer animals to produce the pounds of beef that the market is looking for. So are we going to see the similar gains that we have in the past with carcass weights? One of the things we need to be aware of is back in 2013, we actually had steer weights, 101% of your mature bull weights. And then we actually saw an increase in weights from our cow herd as we ended up with larger cows. And that actually dropped our steer weights back down again into the low to mid 90s. And in the last couple of years in Canada, we've seen steer weights at 97 to 99% of bull weights again. And so it's recognizing that as the industry has gotten more efficient, that there's potentially going to be a slowdown in the annual growth in carcass weights, and that the record highs that we're seeing right now in Western Canada are expected to be the peak in this cycle, because as supplies tighten, we're going to see those feedlots get more current. The other thing of note is what makes this current cattle cycle different than the cycle that we saw in 2014-15. And this chart really shows one of the key differences of this current cattle cycle. And that's the fact that in the US, their female slaughter is over 50% of their total slaughter right now. And that's because of drought and the liquidation that's happening. And the last time that occurred in the US is back in the mid 80s and late 1970s. And so this is very different than 2013, 14, 15, when you saw that rapid expansion. And this means that we could have a longer bottom in terms of tight supplies as we're waiting for improvements in forage conditions before producers expand, both in Canada, but also in the US. So moving on to grain prices and feed. Alberta hay prices, which you can see on the left there, moved sharply higher mid-year, and they actually moved back up to those record high levels that we saw in the first half of 2022. So cow-calf producers are still being pinched in terms of hay because hay is the primary feedstuff for cow-calf producers from coast to coast in Canada. In contrast, in the US, they actually saw a rebuilding of their hay stocks in 23, and they saw hay prices move sharply lower in the second half of the year, to the point that last November, Montana hay was $35 to $40 per ton lower than Alberta. And feed grain prices have continued to move down over the last year from the high levels that they were at. And we continue to see reports, not just in Canada and the US, but other countries that have had larger than expected production in 23 be reported that have continued to see those prices move lower. The Lethbridge barley price here in January, February is below the 5-year average. And this has been really positive as we move through the fall run and supporting feeder prices. But where everybody's eyes are at is really on the weather side and what can we expect in 2024. And so Matt Makins does a quarterly weather report for Canfax, and his projections for this spring is really warmer than average temperatures right across the country, but really spotty precipitation that you can see on the right-hand side. And the challenge with this is we've had spotty precipitation over the last 2 years, and that soil moisture is really lacking in a number of regions, especially at the deep soil moisture levels. And so having those warmer temperatures and higher evaporation is going to be challenging. For those who did receive fall moisture before the ground froze, that's going to be really key for spring grass growth. And the other difference that we've seen, even in the last 6 weeks in Matt's forecast, is a moving up of when he's expecting to see spring moisture. So he had originally been looking at rains in late June for most of the prairies. And you can see on the right-hand side here, his June forecast, covering a lot of Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, not so much in Manitoba, but he's moved that forecast up to about 3 weeks into early June. And those 3 weeks in June is a huge difference for producers and for grass and forage production. So moving on to domestic supplies, we've really seen these opposing pressures that the cow-calf producer is facing. And that's the fact that there is a price signal to expand and to retain heifers. But the challenge is forage availability. If you have winter feed available, if you have summer pasture available, or if that summer pasture has been beat up and just really needing to destock in order to ensure that when rains do come, that it is able to recover in a timely manner. And what this means is we saw cow marketings up a modest 1% in 2023. And for a lot of people, this is surprising because you saw domestic slaughter up. Our domestic slaughter, which is the blue bar, was up 7% last year, but we saw a corresponding decrease in live exports to the US. And this really put our beef cow culling rate at around 13%. And we need to remember that our long-term average culling rate is about 11%, which means, yes, we're in liquidation mode in the Canadian cow herd, but it is a modest liquidation compared to what many would expect with the current drought conditions. And that's because producers are really looking at alternative ways that they can keep these breeding females given the current price signals. And part of what shows the optimism at the cow-calf sector is what we saw in terms of bred heifer prices and bred cow prices last fall, as again, we saw prices meet or exceed what was seen in 2015. Now, calf prices are significantly higher than what we saw in 2015 as we hit that $4 mark, but I think there is efforts to be more disciplined, recognizing that some of these extreme highs that were paid for breeding stock didn't net out in terms of profitability. And so while there's significant optimism and interest in these animals, there's still recognition of wanting to make sure that we stay within an appropriate price point. And so in terms of price relationships, historically, we usually see bred heifers at about 39% over the 550-pound steer price. And last fall in the fourth quarter, it jumped to about 45%. So we're definitely seeing optimism there, but trying to be more disciplined. In terms of supplies, over the last several years, we've definitely seen the importance of our net feeder trade. In 2019, Canada became a net importer of feeder cattle with the US. And here you can see that anything above the line means that we're importing more than we're exporting. And you can see in the third quarter, we were basically steady, but in the fourth quarter, those blue bars are significantly below what we saw in 22, which are the red bars. And that really shows that not only do we have a smaller calf crop coming forward, but we have smaller net trade happening, which is really going to result in tighter supplies in the second quarter of this year. In addition, I think one of the biggest stories for 2024 is the seasonality. Yes, we're looking at tighter, but when are we looking at tighter? You can see here that placements into feedlots last summer were actually up from May through September, and that was because of drought. And these were yearlings that had to be placed into feedlots due to lack of grass conditions. In contrast, you can see that smaller calf crop result in smaller placements in the fourth quarter. And so right now we have ample supplies of readily available fed cattle going to slaughter, which is pressuring prices. I already mentioned record high carcass weights, particularly in Alberta, which is also weighing on current prices in Alberta. And we really need to get through them before we see some price improvement. But as we move into these tighter supplies that have been placed against and in the second half, we are definitely going to see price support. So overall, we saw domestic beef production down 5% last year, with a big drop in our fed production offset by that larger cow slaughter. And we're looking at another 3% drop here this year. So again, like the US, a smaller decrease, but we are moving into tighter supplies. One of the questions that we've been asked has been, what does our dairy herd contribute to beef production in Canada? And it sits at around 20%. But there's been lots of interest in the adoption of beef semen on these dairy cows as they're using sexed semen to produce their replacement females. And we need to remember that this shift from a Holstein calf to beef on dairy cross steer is not actually adding more calves to the herd. These calves existed before. It just means that you have a more feed efficient animal that has fewer days to slaughter and potentially a slightly heavier carcass weight if we're changing that mix of steers and heifers. Where we see a slight increase in the supply in Canada is if you look back in 2005, that red bar, which is veal slaughter, has dropped. So we have more of these dairy calves being finished to full weight in feedlots, but this is a very minor change overall. The bigger change has been back in 2017, there was a US packer in the Pacific Northwest that stopped taking dairy type cattle. And this pushed some of those dairy types into Alberta. And so we saw a strong surge in imports, but we have seen a decline from the peak in 2019 as there's been a shift from dairy type imports to more beef type imports. And that's a soft number that we get from Canada Border Services. I'm not sure if the inspectors know the difference between a black hide that's a Angus on Holstein cross, or if they're simply saying it's going to a feedlot. But overall, we have been told that there's been a reduction, even though we do see lots of those types of animals in feedlots these days. The other half of this story, as we think about tighter supplies, and this is where we may see greater volatility from media reports, is on the demand side. And one of the key things to remember when there's market reports about demand erosion or softer demand is that we jumped in 2020 to the strongest demand since the late 1980s. And we've really been there for the last 3 to 4 years. And so as we move into a potentially weaker demand situation, as consumers are pressured by economic pressures, food price inflation, erosion of purchasing power, we need to remember that we're starting from a very strong position. And we also need to remember that in Canada, consumers are really only spending 18 to 20% of their disposable income on food. So it's a relatively small portion of their budget. There have been other areas of their budget, such as housing costs, mortgages, rent, that have had a bigger impact on their budgeting decisions. But one of the things that the media frequently calls us about here at the office is, price of retail beef is going up or is record high. And one of the things we try to remind them about is the fact that there is general food price inflation overall. And retail beef price inflation has actually been very similar or slightly lower than the average all food retail price inflation. So it's not that beef should be pointed out as being different, but a lot of these calls really reflect the fact that consumers care about having beef on the center of their plate. It's a hot topic. It's something they're passionate about because they want beef on their plate. In contrast, you can see here that chicken prices, unlike so many other things that had food price inflation go down in 2023, it went up in 2023. They're the real outlier here, but who really cares about chicken? The other thing to notice here is the fact that bakery and cereal goods are and have been above 10% for the last 2 years. And again, no one's concerned about the fact that their bread is more expensive or the fact that they've had to trade down from artisan bread down to Wonder Bread. It's just not something they're that passionate about. In contrast, when you get the media report and you see, someone's asking about retail beef prices, you need to remember it's because they care and they want to be able to afford it and put it on their plate. One of the things we've been watching closely is, as there are economic pressures, is the consumer switching down. And they can switch to pork and poultry, but before that, they typically switch down within the category. So switching from strip loin steaks down to ground beef. And when you see this happen, you would see that price relationship between the two to shrink. So instead of having ground beef at only half of the price of strip loin steak, you would see it at like a 0.6. And while it's moving in that direction over the fourth quarter of 23, we're definitely actually below levels that we saw, in that 2017 to 2019 time period. And we're watching this closely, but one of the reasons why we're continuing to see consumer resilience in this space is the fact that, yes, we have cost inflation, but we're also seeing wage inflation. So On the right-hand side, you can see the number of pounds of retail beef that the average Canadian consumer can buy for their hourly wage. And from 2021 to current, we've been lower than we were historically, but we're not seeing some sharp drops. And that's because we're seeing incremental changes in wages that are supporting protein consumption. So one of the things that we are definitely seeing in Canada is there's been a growth in protein production since 2014, specifically of pork and poultry. And so there's going to be more pork and poultry available on the market, and that's the expectation here moving forward. That's going to create competition at the meat counter for beef. And that's something that if we want to protect market share and keep beef on the center of the plate for Canadians, and we know that we're going through a tighter portion of the cattle cycle, what are some things that can be done? And what we've seen in the past is, this is our total Canadian beef consumption. And you see that red bar, which is our domestic production, when it dropped from 2004 to 2015, the total didn't drop as much because we supplemented supplies with imports. And no producer wants to hear that we're going to see larger imports during the bottom of the cattle cycle. But the reality is we know that once we start increasing production again, we can regain that market share back from imports. It's easier to replace beef on the plate with beef from Canada versus trying to gain it back from pork or poultry. And one of the things that is going to encourage imports as supplies tighten is when our lean trim price is at a premium to other exporting countries. So here you can see that between June and November, that blue line, which is the domestic price, was at a premium to both Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And specifically, I mentioned earlier that Australia was going into drought. They increased production, they increased exports, they definitely increased volumes coming to Canada during that period. But in December, our domestic price dropped down. And so this is going to be something that is going to continue to be watched as we go through this bottom of the cattle cycle. But we need to remember that overall, Canada is still by far a net exporter of beef. And we are definitely a net exporter of high quality, grain-fed, youthful beef. What we have a shortage of that we import is some of that lean manufacturing beef that comes from Australia, New Zealand, and other countries. But you can even see here on the black line that our imports really since 2003 have been below what we saw in the early 2000s. And so we could definitely increase these imports and still be below historical levels. And we get our imports primarily from the United States. And we have a whole mix of other countries that we also import from, but we are importing based on that price point and who's able to provide a competitive product to the Canadian consumer. One of the main things that producers can do to support demand is that growing percentage of AAA and prime product, because it gives a consistent eating experience for the consumers, even if they don't have great cooking skills. And so that increased marbling really helps if someone's not paying attention to the barbecue. So I know I'm almost out of time. I'm actually over time here. So we're very going to quickly go through price expectations. We've seen cow prices up $20 a hundredweight from last year here as we start the year. And we typically see, a rally of 17 to 26% from January to a May high for anyone who's retained their cows from the fall into the spring to see better prices. We are expecting that rally to be smaller in Eastern Canada based on their current price trends. On the fed cattle side, we are looking at fed prices to be steady to higher than last year, but you need to remember those feedlots are facing record high break-even prices this year, and we are looking at the lowest prices occurring here in the first quarter, as we've just seen record high carcass weights and just ample supplies weighing on the market right now. Moving on to feeders. Heavyweight feeders in both the East and the West are looking to be stronger than last year, supported by that rally that we saw here in January on the live cattle futures, but also supported by those lower feed costs that I already mentioned. On the calf side, we've actually seen continued strength on the calf side as we've seen the expectations of tighter supplies in the second half. These lighter weight animals that are going to be hitting that market have been strongly supported. And you've already heard about livestock price insurance and what their top coverage levels are, but looking at prices to being steady to higher than we saw last fall. One of the things that took off the edge on calf prices last fall was the rally in the Canadian dollar from October through the end of December. And this had a bigger impact on the Ontario market than it had on the Alberta market. And part of that is because we have feedlots that are being really competitive in the West in order to fill bunk space and those pens as we are going into a tighter supply situation. So just to wrap up, factors to watch this year, we have a slow North America herd rebuilding situation. And we know that we are going to have tighter supplies guaranteed for the next 2 years at a minimum, and potentially longer, depending on how long it takes for forage recovery and herd expansion to actually occur. We've also seen producers in North America looking to have some financial recovery as they've had large expenditures due to the drought in the last several years. And there's been input cost uncertainty and higher interest rates, which means there's lots of questions about what price is needed to cover their cost of production, as there's been a lot of adjustments in input costs. On that consumer resilience side, really, you can expect to hear a lot about this in the media, but we need to remember that right now we currently have no evidence of shifting down by the Canadian consumer, and that as we see rising wages with a very tight North American labor market, that is going to be supportive to consumer resilience for the protein market in general here this year. And the main priority is to protect market share, specifically protect market share against pork and poultry. The big risks this year, I don't need to tell you, are the weather and who gets rain, and with spotty forecasts, sometimes it's about which piece of land is under the rain cloud and which isn't. And that market volatility and uncertainty that is expected of just having a risk management plan, talking with your banker, and making sure that you're prepared when those shifts come. So just in closing, I want to remind you that the Beef Cattle Research Council is running their Canadian cow-calf survey. This is the inaugural cow-calf survey with everything in a single place. Historically, these have been done provincially, but this is going to provide national statistics to guide research. And their deadline is March 31st. So you can grab that QR code, or you can go to the beefresearch.ca website, and there'll be a blog article to give you more information on that. So that's all I have, Sean. I'd be happy to take questions.
Thanks, Brenna, for that presentation. With lower grain prices, lower cattle inventories, there's a lot of positive indications for the markets going forward. So it's always nice to be an analyst when there's so much positive news in the marketplace, and makes your job a little bit easier.
A wee bit easier. I don't want to downplay the fact that there's definitely challenges that producers are facing on both the weather and the cost fronts. And it's one where when things are moving so fast, it's really difficult to get a handle on some of those cost numbers for producers. And so knowing your numbers and knowing where your operation is at is really critical, because there's just so much variation from one operation to another.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have super high input costs, and even though our returns are higher, sometimes those margins aren't as wide as we'd like. And Manitoba Agriculture does have some really good cost of production for beef and cow-calf, and for feeders and pasture, as well as crop and other commodities. So encourage producers to check that out on our website. So I don't.
Absolutely. And I would just also mention the Canadian Cow-Calf Cost of Production Network. It's really focused on benchmarking different production systems. And that's one where you see the significant variation from one production system to another. And sometimes it can be really confusing when you see all of that information. And I would just encourage producers to actually see the opportunity there of the potential to make incremental improvements and changes on their operation to become more competitive and to improve profitability, but also to recognize that making a profit as a cow-calf producer is possible. And those benchmarks show that.
Very good. Thank you, Brenna. I don't think, Lori, there's any other questions?
Nope, I don't see any other questions.
All right. So thank you to all our speakers for their interesting presentations today. Just going to share a couple slides yet. Brenna mentioned the cow-calf survey, so you have until the end of March to complete that at BCRC's website. And I did mention our cost of production, but also if you're looking for a calving book or the latest Seed Manitoba for variety selections, or Yield Manitoba, which is a summary of yields across the province on an RM and variety basis, you can pick up one of those at your local Manitoba Ag or MASC office. And our next webinar will be on March 14th, Ask the Vet. We have a couple vets talking about calving tips as well as vaccination programs for their herd. And then April 11th is a presentation on poisonous plants on pastures, squeal on pigs, and replacement heifer management. So that concludes today's Stock Talk. I'd like to thank you for joining, and I hope to see you on March the 14th.